NVIDIA has been, I've been in NVIDIA for a little while, 20 years, and one of the really fascinating things about technology is how it sprawls and changes and ends up in places that were not expected. When I joined NVIDIA, we were trying to do a very simple thing, which was graphics, which turns out to be one of the most complex things on earth, but it was simple in concept. And over that duration of time, we've learned and migrated the technology to solve other people's problems, because that's basically what, as a company, you chase people's problems. And if you can solve a problem, then usually you get rewarded in some fashion. And so what I'm going to talk about, actually, is the next huge challenge for autonomous vehicles. And it really comes from a couple different areas. So the simple way of looking at NVIDIA is we came from the gaming market. So anybody who watches a game or conversely goes to a movie and it looks like a game, likely done through NVIDIA technology, the graphics processes that do that. As we were working on that technology, we realized that we were building a massively parallel processor. Every pixel in that screen, fundamentally, behind it, there's a computer program that we had to run. And as we realized that, we started changing and morphing what we built, and that became effectively what a lot of the huge supercomputers on Earth are now powered by as GPUs, the compute power from that. That created the next revolution when people realized you could use a GPU to do artificial intelligence or machine learning or deep learning. And that then spawned out to autonomous vehicles. So that is literally the trajectory that we've been doing. Now, I'm going to dive right into autonomous vehicles. And you did a great job of talking. It's not just a car. And that's probably, the one thing as people from the outside look at, like, oh, I think my new, Chrysler van will be autonomous. Well, that's just one small sliver of transportation today. We are engaged with over 370 different organizations, companies, research institutions around the world on autonomous vehicles. By the way, I'm not showing trains and I'm not showing ships. We're also engaged with those, right? Virtually every aspect of things that move is becoming autonomous. And there's a variety of reasons for that. There's an economic reasons, there's a huge safety component to it, and there's just the flexibility of it as well, right? People talk about the fact that in trucking today, it's hard to hire trucking drivers. It's a huge issue. Meanwhile, you have the Amazon effect. So I don't have drivers and I want to ship more, right? And so that creates this huge pressure, this huge dynamic. Now, I focus most of my time on the things on the far left top. We have people who focus on trucking. We have people who focus on agriculture. And you get into the busing and shuttles. They're all different markets, and they actually are trying to solve different problems. And so when someone says autonomous vehicle to me, I quickly start asking, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I'm in a geo-fenced area, and I just have to service 33 blocks within a city. Completely different than an Uber, which will take me to the airport and back, which is completely different to, I need to bring this truckload of hay from the field to a distribution center. They're all different problems, and they require different solutions as well. Probably the thing that the people in this room have a good grasp and understanding of, it's not a simple problem. It's an incredibly complex problem. When you get in a quote-unquote ADAS vehicle today, it fundamentally is just looking for lanes and trying to follow those down the street, right? And ideally, you're in the center lane because the lanes are very consistent. You don't want to be in the right-hand lane so much because that lane disappears on you all the time. And you'll see ADAS cars hunt and move away from that. They're very early versions of an autonomous vehicle. And left-hand lane, there's always someone trying to come up behind you, so you want to be out of that lane. So the center lane is a really nice place to be for an autonomous vehicle today, an ADAS vehicle today. But you start getting into all these other aspects of an autonomous vehicle. Gentleman right here, you're that guy in that middle, right? How does an autonomous vehicle know what this means, right? Or just your face. I mean, I've had some phenomenal facial recognition aspects of people look at me like, really? Right? So these autonomous vehicles have to be able to understand people as well as situations. This is essentially a grand challenge kind of problem. For people familiar with grand challenges, these are just massive problems, right? We have to understand our environment. We have to understand all the different aspects that are going on, right? And then we have to understand things that we haven't seen before. Think of that, right? Now, we as a human handle that very easily, right? We take our other background and use that to make a decision, right? I've never seen anything. The example I use, because everybody should have a personal example. Example I use, I moved back from Silicon Valley back to Massachusetts where I grew up, and I live by a fishing port. New Bedford is the largest fishing port in the country. Most of the fish that you eat comes shuttling through there off of boats. And I was down there driving away, had a stoplight, there's a tractor trailer in front of me. Tractor trailer pulled out, the rear opened up. Now if you don't know, but fish, they travel in boats with ice. Giant blocks of ice, the size of your table, came flying out of this tractor trailer. Now I knew as a person to stop, but I also know we have zero software trained today to recognize that's ice, right? And so right now we just would stop it. You don't know what to do, right? Can you go through it? Is it a balloon, right? So these examples, what people consider corner cases are actually more and more common in reality. And trying to capture those different environments and use those to effectively train neural networks. The big shift that happened, and it's, a couple years ago actually, not that many years ago, was we realized that artificial intelligence could solve problems that we as humans could not. Because we as humans program, right? We program, this gentleman here said that, I have to recognize the finger, the hand, the gesture, edge detection they call it, right? It's kind of complex, but if he does it like this, software fails. Or if he does it like this, the software fails. Or the lighting's wrong, the software fails. Because our programming, we had to program for every possible condition. Well, AI can understand and interpret those edge cases and make a determination. But you start looking at it we're talking about multiple different types of problems we're solving now for an autonomous vehicle. The place that most people talk about today is in the top left, perception. Seeing the world, understanding the world, comprehending the world. That then drives reasoning, prediction. You have to understand where I am, and then you end up with a decision, right? Now, an autonomous vehicle, our research vehicles and the companies that are working with us today, if you're driving at 65 miles an hour, we're doing all the perception, all the reasoning, all the prediction, taking the map in, location, every 30 milliseconds. So 65 miles an hour, we're taking the entire world, creating it, understanding it, and making a decision every 2 feet. Right? And that's barely fast enough. That's why it takes a supercomputer. That's why the computational load is so high. We're just starting this process of understanding each one of these, right? I'm just kind of curious, how many people know how a neural network works? Just they touch it in their life. Not a bad touch, that's good. So this is fundamentally what has driven this artificial intelligence push, is the ability to take very, very small aspects, understand the edges, understand what they are, and build out to a comprehension. You get all the way out here, that was an Audi A7. Now, if you think about it, there are some things that are really hard that are not this simple. So we're working with other companies, other startups that are working on human behavior. Right? Because human behavior is not an Audi A7. So what is human behavior? If you think about it, and I'm perceiving a car in front of me, and I'm driving, I'm not a computer which just sits there and says, oh, gee, it's 63 feet away, which is what LiDAR would tell you. The camera would tell you it's blue, right? All these different perception capabilities. But what you're trying to do is figure out, that person's doing this, right? What is that car about to do? So there's several startups we're working with that are just on the human behavior side. What is the car, the vehicle, the pedestrian, the bicyclist likely to do given what I'm watching this person do now? It's yet another neural network that has to reside in this car, right? So there's not just the perception side, but also the forecasting side, right? Now, some of us, I would say, are dimly aware of a car going like that. These gentlemen are highly aware. They're looking for that. They're looking for those outliers, right? They're looking for someone who doesn't seem quite okay, right? The thing that we're all looking for is that they have a phone in front of their face, right? Because that's the most dangerous, the phone now is the most dangerous weapon on earth. Right, the distracted driver, right, is totally the most dangerous thing. Well, how do we see someone who's staring at their phone and starting to drive like that, or they're starting to edge over, right? So we have to perceive all these things. This right here, we did this about 2 years ago with Audi, and this is effectively, we have a scene, they gave it to us, it's a very, very busy scene, and our whole goal is to see and understand what is in the world. Right? Very, very simple. That's a car, that's a pedestrian, and basically start categorizing and pulling these things through. Now, at NVIDIA, to get the accuracy up, this is years ago, so this is actually pretty horrible nowadays, right? To get the accuracy up, there's another group of people that take an image and they put a bounding box around it, right? And they label it. We now have 1,500 people working within NVIDIA as a contract group just to create images that have bounding boxes so we can train our neural networks so we can perceive people accurately. We had them for a while, right? That's just to get the accuracy up, right? So 1,500 people so we can do this better and better and better, constantly improving it. The data, you know, people talk about big data and data science. This is a huge project for us and the entire industry. How do we collect this data? How do you segment it? How do you make sure it's curated? How do you make sure it's accurate? Because this is effectively writing the software. This is how artificial intelligence gets written. They look at these images and they make decisions and they improve. Well, it leads you to the next thing, which is, what is the free space? Where can I take my vehicle? What is safe to go? Right? Because if you don't know what's there, you don't know what to do next. So the safety part, now you can see this purple area right here, that is the free space detection. That's where I'm allowed to drive my vehicle, now that I have the basic information. And so you can see, like, pedestrians are green and other vehicles. So, by the way, we're not doing bikes here 2 years ago. We didn't do strollers, right? Balls running across the street, children running after balls we can pick up, but balls not so much 2 years ago. So we are constantly improving this. So the next thing that really comes in is, well, when people say an autonomous vehicle, they think it's like a singular piece of software. And it cannot be further from the truth, right? For safety, when you look at safety, you're looking for redundancy, multiple ways to do the same thing, and a second thing called diversity, different types of ways to do the exact same thing. And so we will have multiple different neural networks. We're running 12 to 14 neural networks today, simultaneously, all running together to create this common view of what the world looks like and where it is safe to put the vehicle 2 feet from now at 65 miles an hour. Now you can start thinking about it, it's like, it's kind of a hard, this is a hard problem. Right? So when people say, how soon are autonomous vehicles going to be here, step back and think about this, right? We believe by far we're way ahead of many, many people. There's some major, major, major problems still to go. When you start looking at all these different things here, one of the things we got here in the top right is LiDAR. So LiDAR is different than radar, is different than cameras. Now, for a long time, we believed it's a combination of these different sensors that then you fuse into a view of the world. That's a pretty complex problem, and the breakthroughs have happened in the last couple of years. How do you pull all this into a neural network? Use LiDAR data plus radar data plus camera. Each one of them, if you do kind of chart, they have different strengths. You know, this one works really well at night. This one works really great, you know, in foggy. Right? One of the biggest changes was cameras were much, much better than everybody had predicted because of AI. And so cameras, a very low-cost sensor, could be scattered around vehicles and used, and much, much higher fidelity than was currently thought possible. And so as you start taking all these different things, these perception inputs start impacting everything else. Now, by the way, I've only talked about the vehicle. I haven't talked about vehicle to vehicle. Like, how do you communicate this up? How do you communicate this down? Those are separate issues. You almost have to think of it as a separate problem. That was background. Everything I just said, just background, just to give you background, right? Because when you start thinking about autonomous vehicle, right now, you know, the statistic, I mean, you probably know the statistic off your head much better than I do, but we're talking about trillions of miles of cars traveled per year. And there's only a couple crashes for that. So if you sit there and say, okay, we want to go out and put vehicles on the road, autonomous vehicles, and test them, and you hear about them out there, how many millions of miles to billions of miles would vehicles have to travel before you felt, hey, this is really rock solid safe? That's the problem. That's the fundamental problem, right? I would personally, and not for the company to state this, but I would personally argue, this is the largest research and development project ever done in public. Think of any product you've ever bought. It was designed in a lab, in a building, and then it was done and it was handed to you, and it was perfect. Autonomous vehicles are out in the real world, trying to collect data, trying to understand, are the algorithms accurate. That is a really good thing to do, You may have heard of the term of neither adequate nor sufficient, right? That's what we believe. That's something required. We're out there doing it. All of our partners are doing it. But we believe that simulation is the only path to get there. All right, so what is simulation? This is, so in the beginning, it's like me. It's like my childhood pictures at NVIDIA, right? So gaming did simulation effectively from the beginning. That's what it is. It's creating an artificial world that you then get to interact with it, with the entire goal of making you happy and entertained. That was its entire goal. And so it drove our business because people wanted to see it. The next kind of domain is Hollywood, right? I've been working professionally with Hollywood for 25 years. I was at Silicon Graphics before I was at NVIDIA, so graphics is kind of my domain. And this right here is the kind of a classic, this is Star Wars, right? Well, we were actually able, I won't show it here, I don't think it runs here, but we actually did this with Lucas where it's now interactive. This is completely synthetic. Right? So we went from that kind of cartoony, didn't look real, wasn't supposed to look real, to like, wait a minute, that's just a scene from Star Wars. So now we can recreate that at an enormous rate of speed we can create these, which is, if you think about it, speed is everything, right? Thank God I had volume, sorry. This is a game from a couple years ago, so this is a driving simulator. The whole goal here is to beat everybody else, right? So there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that goes into doing a driving simulator, right? There's actual physics in a driving simulator, right? I would call it cursory physics, not full-on vehicle dynamics, but it's cursory physics. We've had teams working on this with our partners for years and years, right? So we start with like, okay, you have the concept of the car going in the street, you have realism. The next thing is you have to put it in an environment that looks real. And then you've got effectively the infrastructure in your head of, okay, I need to have these different aspects, but now I have to test it. And so we've come up with a concept we call Constellation. This is what's being developed inside of NVIDIA, where we take everything I've just talked about, all the vehicle information is coming in, right? And we sit there and say, okay, we have to render what that vehicle sees from each of its sensors, right? So when I say each of its sensors, let's say for discussion that vehicle's got LiDAR up on top, and so you have LiDAR, so I have to synthetically create LiDAR coming in. I'm going to render the LiDAR points, if you will. I have radar. I have to render radar. I have to render the camera. Right? I have all these cameras, right? If you think of a car, it's got cameras that face forward at this angle, on the sides, and the back and rear, right? Each of those cameras have to be rendered. And so what we're doing is this machine down here at the bottom, there's a DGX and DGX2. These machines render that world in super real time, meaning faster than real time. Right? So then we have all these images, all this data, we can feed it somewhere. So we feed it into the second box. The second box actually is, you think of it like, you have one server feeding a second machine. Well, the second machine is actually kind of unique because we can put other hardware in it. We can put the compute of the car in there. Right? Now, when we do the sim, I'm just going to talk about the sim for a second. What you're going to see here is this isn't a real world. They can change the light. Right? It sounds, oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, you think about it from a simulator, what we're trying to do is that's time of day. So I can take any picture, any world, and change the time of day. Well, you think of those 1,500 people creating an image. They had an image of that day at that time with that lighting, and it's fixed. It's done. In a simulator, I can have a slider effectively. What time of day? Is the light coming at me in the morning, coming across? The light behind me? Right? It's going to impact every sensor. Right? Well, if you can do light, the next thing obviously is you can do seasonality. Right? We already showed that we've taken with it's called a GAN, it's an adversarial network. We can actually take a picture, let's say of this street right here, and we can say, that should be fall, so all the leaves gone. Or it's winter, snow. Right? So we can take an image and change time of day on one axis and seasons. Now, why is that so important? Because fundamentally, we have to go test our software against all these different scenarios. So how do I take the 5 million, 10 million, 20 million images and make that 1 billion images to test against, right? So this is this technology that we're working on. At the same time, our partners, people who build cars and do the research, they all have a different view of where the sensors are. I would like 3 cameras up front. I have a shuttle company that's doing, everything's in stereo, 2 cameras, because they get better depth out of stereo, right? So I want to simulate my particular configuration. So we're building out this configurator so they can actually build the car that they're doing with their simulators with the different sensors. Now, one of the things that was kind of curious like 3-4 years ago, we go and talk to all the startups and all the companies, and we'd ask them to go to whiteboard and say, you know, what's your configuration of sensors? There was absolutely no consensus at all. You know, you go to one company that's like, you know, there's 20 LiDAR. You go, LiDARs are like 50,000 each. Yeah, well, okay, 5 LiDAR, you know. They change, you know, so these things have been changed and dynamic. Well, the key thing is you have to be able to simulate in this dynamic world. One vehicle might be a level 4 or level 5, highly, highly autonomous. Another vehicle might be a level 2 or 3, less autonomous. The number of sensors are going to be different. I still need to test all my software. So on the left-hand side, you've got the simulator running. On the right-hand side, I now have got my software that's going to go in my vehicle running, and we're testing to see, does it see the world as we expect it to? Nothing in this world is real, by the way. This is not a real world. And this is taken from a couple months ago, so it's not even, to my eyes, it's not that great. But that's another project. And so it's taking the simulated world, and we're taking the software and running it against this synthetic world and testing the software. Again, it's really nice. It's barely adequate. Definitely not sufficient. So next thing is, how does that simulator work if I put a person in the loop? So I'm going to go and I'm going to annoy this other driver. I'm going to annoy the vehicle. Right? Now, we already know that everybody's going to say, oh, man, there's going to be kids. They're going to see an autonomous car. They're going to do something to it. Who knows what they're going to do? Well, you can simulate that. You can say, how does my artificial intelligence stack deal with someone who's slowing down, speeding up, going across lanes? You can actually see that in real time. Right? So it's yet another aspect. Now, you kind of got to go past that, which is like I've got multiple sensors. That was just a singular sensor, so I have to bring up all those sensors. So I got multi-sensor simulation. I have to change the time of day across all those multi-simulators. And the next thing is, it's kind of the destination. So we've got the software, we've got a simulator up, we've got all the sensors, we're inputting all this rendered environment into the sensors. The next step is hardware in the loop, meaning I just took, so Mississippi State has a Drive PX2. That's the platform, Drive. We then take that Drive platform, drop it into the data center. So now we've got the rendering server, we've got a server over here that's going to be ingesting all that information, and outputting CAN bus, by the way, which is to the car, effectively. I've got the actual hardware payload that will be in the vehicle, and each manufacturer is going to have a little different payload. I've got the software stack up and running on it. This is how we're going to get to billions of miles, that we feel confident an autonomous vehicle can handle all these situations. Right? We will not get there just by driving cars around. It's completely required we do that, because they go out and they capture real-world events, right? But we have to, how do we have all the possible real-world events out there? Well, that's where software and simulation and clever engineering comes in, right? How do I take and say, how do I have basketballs running across the street? Now, Google did obvious things. They took a truck and they just drove it in front of an autonomous vehicle, and they threw stuff at the car to see how it reacted. You can do that. You can absolutely do that. You should do that, right? Traffic cones that suddenly go off the lane and come out and they're waving all around. You should do that. But you should also do it in simulation, because you need to do it at night. They didn't do it at night. I guarantee you Google doesn't have a lot of data in snow, right? Or fog, or rain, right? There's researchers that we're working with that are doing it in flood zones. How does the autonomous vehicle handle 6 inches of flood? Did anybody see the news this weekend? I think it was Maryland, right? Yeah. That's flooding. And you talked about weather, right? Yeah, it's a real thing, and that is a huge research area for all the autonomous vehicles out there. How do you handle these different weather environments? So I think I kind of gave you a little overview of how we are looking at solving the autonomous vehicle problem. It isn't just hardware. It isn't just some pieces of software. It's a wide variety of things. And the next thing, I don't have any slides up, but I want to talk about it briefly, is we are looking at this from the perspective of there's the vehicle itself and everything outside the vehicle. We have two other rather large teams that are working on the person inside. So, you discussed about, what are you going to do for 2 hours, right? Well, we have, called Drive IX at NVIDIA, we have huge amounts of networks, artificial intelligence inside the cabin. If you think about the simplest problem, right? You're in an autonomous vehicle, you're relaxing, you go, hey, I want a coffee over there. What car can handle that today, right? And you had the radio on. You were listening to music. So what do I need? I need gaze estimation. I need pose estimation. I need to track this arm. I need to, we do artificial intelligence for lip reading because we're going to marry the speech to text for research as well as the lip reading. We take all of that and then we have to fuse that with the world outside that says we just passed 2 coffee places. The person must be talking about those, right? Another group does Drive AR, augmented reality. How do you communicate to the person in the vehicle that the car sees things? Right? You talk about acceptance of autonomous vehicles. Well, one of the things that I like, and we've done this for years in our own research vehicles, is those little bounding boxes, highlighting those, I feel a lot better when I see that, right? Because it's new technology still to me. So the augmented reality, how do we put up on the display, the car sees all the things that it's reacting to versus did it see that kid? Right? How do we communicate to the person? And there's a bunch of research out there that's working on all the world around the car. The first place I saw, it was actually at Berkeley, UCal Berkeley in the Deep Drive program. There was a person doing pedestrian intent. And you sit there going, like, pedestrian intent, right? Well, yeah, we have to worry about that. There's a road here, and this is, the person standing here, what are they doing? What are they about to do? We have to look at everybody in our environment and make predictions on what they're doing. And everything I just talked about has to end up in a simulator so we can run those billions of miles. So hopefully that gave you a little overview of what we're working on with our partners. We have a lot of partners out there. But this is really, really fascinating research and development. One of the things at NVIDIA is the work we're doing here is leveraged across all the different businesses. If you talk, you look at things that are happening at Amazon, Alexa, behind that are GPUs. They train the networks with us, they run the networks on us. All the different things that are out there, whether it's a Twitter feed or Facebook, there are GPUs in these data centers solving these problems. And those solutions, people write a white paper, it gets published, people say, oh, that would solve my problem in a completely different domain. And it's actually driving the march of technology forward for autonomous vehicles. It's a really fascinating time. That's what I had to say. Thank you very much for your time today.